Lisa Johnson, an 8-year-old girl with bright, inquisitive eyes, stepped onto the school bus with excitement. It was her first day in a new neighborhood, a new school, and she couldn't wait to begin this new chapter. Her mother, Nina, stood at the door of their new home, watching as the bus drove off, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She could feel the weight of this new beginning, the unknowns that lay ahead for her family in this unfamiliar place. Nina's heart was full of dreams for Lisa, her only daughter. Dreams of a better future, of opportunities that their old neighborhood had never offered. Yet, as she waved goodbye to her little girl, she couldn't shake the sense that something was off, an instinctual feeling that would soon prove to be justified. The Johnsons had just moved into a predominantly white neighborhood, where the neighbors watched them with curious eyes. Despite the surface pleasantries, Nina knew that it would be a challenge. They were the only black family in the area, and she couldn't help but wonder what kind of reception they would receive. As Nina returned to the house, she glanced at the long driveway, the stillness of the street, and the large oak tree that would one day become a central part of their lives. She sighed, looking forward to settling in and making this house feel like home, but there was a nagging feeling at the back of her mind. Something just didn't feel right. Meanwhile, Lisa, with her wide eyes and her backpack bouncing with each step, found a seat on the yellow school bus. The driver, Mr. Miller, looked over at her with a half-smile as she climbed on board. He seemed nice enough, older, with a graying beard and kind eyes, but there was something unsettling about his presence. Nina couldn't quite put her finger on it, but her instincts told her to be cautious. Days passed and Lisa settled into her new school. Each day, Nina dropped her off at the bus stop with a mixture of hope and worry. Would Lisa fit in? Would the other kids accept her? But as the days stretched on, Nina's worries deepened. Lisa, once a bubbly child, began returning from school quieter, more withdrawn. She would talk about her day briefly, but something was different. There was a hesitation in her voice, a kind of reluctance to open up fully about her experiences. A few weeks into Lisa's school year, things began to take a darker turn. Nina's concerns about the bus driver, Mr. Miller, grew as she listened to her daughter's increasingly troubled remarks. At first, Lisa had mentioned that the bus driver said rude things. Nothing specific, but enough to make Nina feel uneasy. When asked about it, Lisa's answers were vague and her behavior seemed to worsen. She was no longer the lively, talkative girl she once was. Instead, she became withdrawn, avoiding conversations about her day and growing quieter by the hour. One evening, as Nina and Malcolm were unpacking their new home, she brought up her concerns. "Do you think something is wrong with Lisa?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Malcolm, who had been preoccupied with his new job and the long commute, seemed too tired to engage with her worries. "She's just adjusting, Nina. It's a big change for her. I'm sure she'll be fine," he said, dismissing her concerns with a wave. But Nina couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. She had seen the subtle signs, Lisa's nervous glances, the way she avoided looking directly at her parents when asked about her school. That night, as Lisa lay in bed, Nina gently brushed her daughter's hair, trying to get her to open up. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" she asked softly. Lisa smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice too quiet, too unsure. Nina tried not to push too hard, but her maternal instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. She knew her daughter too well, and this behavior, this distance, was not normal. The next day, Nina decided to follow Lisa's bus route. She had to know the truth. If her daughter wouldn't talk to her, then she would have to investigate herself. She stood at the bus stop, watching as Lisa climbed aboard the bus, her little backpack bouncing with each step. Nina's heart sank as she caught a glimpse of Mr. Miller's face in the driver's seat. He looked kind enough, but there was something about the way he watched Lisa that made her skin crawl. Nina's days were filled with a constant unease, the worry gnawing at her every waking moment. She continued to monitor Lisa's behavior, looking for signs, clues, anything that would tell her what was really happening at school. But the more she observed, the more she began to feel a sense of isolation. Malcolm, despite his earlier assurances, hadn't taken her concerns seriously. The strain between them grew, and Nina felt more alone than ever. Then one afternoon, after another tense silence between her and Malcolm, Nina finally decided to confront Lisa again. She had to know what was really going on. As Lisa sat in the living room, staring blankly out the window, Nina approached her daughter gently. "Sweetheart, I need you to be honest with me," Nina said, her voice firm but soft. "Is there something happening at school? Something with the bus driver?" Lisa hesitated, looking away. "He says things. Mean things," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nina's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of things, Lisa?" she pressed. Lisa fidgeted, looking terrified. "He says I don't belong. That I shouldn't be there," she said, her eyes filling with tears. He doesn't like me." Nina's blood ran cold. She had known something was wrong, but to hear it confirmed, that this man, this bus driver, was making her daughter feel this way, was more than she could bear. She hugged Lisa tightly, her heart breaking for her sweet girl. Malcolm, after hearing this, was initially skeptical. He didn't want to believe that someone in their new community could act like this, especially not someone so seemingly trustworthy. But Nina's conviction, the fear in Lisa's eyes, left no room for doubt. They had to do something. The very next day, Nina decided to take action. She would confront Mr. Miller, find out the truth, and protect her daughter at all costs. This would no longer be about a mother's intuition. It was about justice. For Lisa. For their family. And for the truth that had been hidden behind Mr. Miller's facade for too long. Lisa's voice faltered as she spoke the words that had been lingering in Nina's mind for weeks. "Mr. Miller, he doesn't like me," she whispered, her eyes downcast as if the very act of saying it out loud made it more real. Nina and Malcolm exchanged a quick, painful glance before turning their full attention back to their daughter, their hearts heavy with dread. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What has he been doing to you?" Lisa bit her lip, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "He says things to me, Mom. Things that make me feel bad. Sometimes he stares at me for too long, like he's watching me. And I don't like it. He gets really close when he talks to me, and I don't know why. I told you he was rude before, but it's more than that. I feel scared when I'm near him, but I didn't know if I should say anything. He's the bus driver and everyone says he's nice, but..." She trailed off, her voice trembling. Nina felt her stomach drop, a cold wave of panic sweeping over her. The words Lisa spoke echoed in her ears, and it took everything in her power not to burst into tears right then and there. The signs she had seen, the odd behavior on the bus, the strange tension she felt in the air, everything was falling into place, but this was so much worse than she had feared. Malcolm looked like he had been struck, his face pale as he processed Lisa's words. For a moment he said nothing, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for something to say. Then his voice came out low but firm. "We're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, Lisa. You did the right thing by telling us. I'm so proud of you for speaking up." Nina nodded, her own voice tight with emotion. "I love you so much, honey. We're going to make sure you're safe no matter what." She hugged Lisa tightly, trying to shield her from the weight of the situation, though she knew it was impossible. The truth had come crashing down, and now they had to act. Lisa looked up at her mother with watery eyes, her small hand gripping Nina's. "But what do we do now, Mom? Will he hurt me again?" Nina held her daughter closer, her heart breaking. "No, sweetheart. He won't. I promise you. We're going to make sure of that." Her mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. She couldn't allow Mr. Miller to hurt her daughter, or anyone else for that matter. But she also knew that she couldn't act rashly. There were steps to take, evidence to gather, and people to talk to. It wasn't just about protecting Lisa anymore. It was about stopping a predator from getting away with his actions. Malcolm stood up, his face a mask of determination. "We're calling the police. We need to report this right away. No more waiting." He paced the room, his mind clearly working through the next steps. "We'll talk to the school, we'll talk to the authorities, and we'll make sure Mr. Miller is held accountable for what he's done." Nina's heart ached as she looked at her daughter, but there was also a fire inside her now. This was no longer about suspicion or unease. It was about taking action, about ensuring that Mr. Miller would never hurt another child again. She nodded firmly, making a silent vow that she wouldn't stop until Lisa was safe and justice was served. But as they prepared to take the first steps toward confronting the horrors that had been lurking in their seemingly quiet neighborhood, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep the problem ran, and how much she had yet to learn about the dark undercurrents hiding behind the friendly facades of the people around her. The coming days would be filled with painful revelations, but Nina knew that she couldn't stop now. For Lisa, for their family, and for every child who might be at risk, she would fight. The truth, no matter how terrible, would be exposed, and they would make sure that Mr. Miller's actions wouldn't go unpunished. As they sat together, holding each other in a tight embrace, the weight of the situation finally began to sink in. But one thing was clear: Nina would never let go of her daughter's safety. Not for a second. The days following that night were a blur of emotions, and Nina found herself navigating a new reality she never thought possible. After speaking with Lisa, they had called the police immediately and a report had been filed. It was only the beginning of what would become an exhausting and emotional ordeal. But Nina knew it was the right thing to do. Her daughter was depending on her to take action, and no matter how terrifying it felt, she would fight tooth and nail to make sure no other child experienced what Lisa had gone through. The phone calls, the meetings with the school, the interviews with authorities, everything seemed to move in slow motion, and yet it was all happening so fast. Lisa was given counseling, and the school initiated an investigation into Mr. Miller's conduct. But every time Nina had to recount what Lisa had told her, it felt like a knife twisting in her gut. Every detail, every word seemed to make the situation more real, more terrifying. Malcolm stood by her side throughout it all, though she could see the strain in his eyes. He wasn't used to this kind of fight, to this kind of fear. But he loved Lisa and he loved Nina, and he would support them no matter what. The community, however, was not so supportive. Nina could feel the tension in the air every time she stepped outside. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and the once friendly faces of her neighbors now seemed guarded, unsure of how to act around her. The fact that Sarah's venomous outburst had happened so early in the process only made things worse. People were choosing sides. Those who had known Mr. Miller for years were adamant in his defense, while others were starting to look at Nina with a mix of pity and judgment. One afternoon, as Nina walked to the mailbox, she saw a few of her neighbors standing across the street, talking in hushed tones. As she approached, they fell silent, their eyes flicking to her before quickly averting their gaze. The tension was palpable. Sarah wasn't among them, but Nina could feel her presence in every whisper. She turned quickly and made her way back inside, her stomach churning. She didn't need this. She didn't need people looking at her like she was the problem. All she wanted was justice for Lisa, a safe home for her family, and a resolution to the nightmare they had found themselves in. When she arrived back at the house, Malcolm was sitting at the kitchen table, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had been making phone calls to the school board and the police, trying to push things along faster. But the bureaucracy of it all was suffocating, and Nina could see the frustration building in him. "How's Lisa?" he asked, his voice weary. Nina paused for a moment before sitting down beside him, her hands folding into her lap. "She's trying, Malcolm. I think she's still scared, but she's handling it the best she can. The counselor said she's showing signs of healing, but it's going to take time." He nodded, his eyes distant. "I just want to make sure she's okay. All of this, it's a lot for her to carry." Nina squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of it too. "We'll get through it together. We have to." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Nina's heart skipped a beat, unsure of who it could be. She stood up, motioning for Malcolm to stay seated, and went to answer it. When she opened the door, a tall man in a suit stood on the other side, his expression serious. Behind him was a woman with a notepad and a recorder. The man introduced himself as Detective Thompson. "Mrs. Johnson," he asked, "we need to talk to you about the ongoing investigation. It's about Mr. Miller." Nina's heart sank, but she nodded, stepping aside to let them in. She led them to the living room, where Malcolm joined them quickly. "We've spoken to Lisa, and we've gathered some additional information," Detective Thompson began, taking a seat. It seems that Mr. Miller has a history that we didn't know about. There are other children who have made similar complaints, though none as direct as your daughter's. We've been reviewing his records, and it's becoming clear that there are patterns we can't ignore. Nina's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Is he? At this stage, it's too early to confirm anything, the detective cut in gently. But we're taking it seriously. We're investigating his history, speaking with other parents, and gathering evidence. Nina looked at Malcolm, her mind racing. Could it be that Mr. Miller had been doing this to other children all along? How had it gone unnoticed for so long? We need you to stay alert, Mrs. Johnson, the detective continued. If Lisa remembers anything else, anything at all, we need her to come forward. And if you hear of anything else, anything, please contact us immediately. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they were facing. Nina nodded, her resolve solidifying. They were going to expose the truth no matter how difficult it was. Lisa deserved better. The children in this community deserved better. As the detective and his partner left, Malcolm turned to Nina, his expression grave. We need to brace ourselves. If this is as bad as it sounds, we're going to have to fight harder than we ever have before. Nina stood up, looking out the window at the quiet street, her eyes filled with determination. We will fight. And we'll win. Later that evening, Nina sat down at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The weight of everything was starting to press down on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. She couldn't allow Mr. Miller to continue hurting children. She couldn't allow this nightmare to claim any more innocent lives. The next day, the school district sent home a letter to all parents, informing them of the ongoing investigation into Mr. Miller. It was a small step, but it felt like a victory. At least the truth was starting to come out. Still, Nina knew this was just the beginning. There were bigger battles ahead, and it wouldn't be easy. But she was prepared. For Lisa, for the children of this neighborhood, and for herself, Nina would fight until the very end. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation into Mr. Miller gained momentum. The support for Nina and Lisa grew, and more parents came forward with their own concerns. The whispers of doubt that had once surrounded Nina began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of solidarity. She wasn't alone in this fight. But despite the progress, Nina couldn't forget the look in Lisa's eyes when she first spoke out about Mr. Miller. The fear, the shame. It was a look that haunted her, that would stay with her forever. And she knew deep down that the road ahead would be long, but she was ready to walk it. For Lisa. For every child. For justice. In the end, they would win. And they would make sure Mr. Miller would never hurt anyone again.